Hello, I'm Mr. Esty, and welcome back to our ASAP debate series. This is our 5th video, and in this video we're going to be focusing on rebuttals. And I'll go over what a rebuttal is, whether or not you're familiar with that term. But first, I want to ask you a question. What do you think is the most important skill for becoming a good debater? Think about it. It's possible that the first idea that pops into your head is something like being able to argue well, being a good speaker, thinking on your feet, knowing a lot, being smart, whatever that means. But I'm going to say that those are all wrong. Those are all important to being a good debater. But the most important part of being a good debater is being a good listener. That's what truly separates the good debaters from the great debaters, and it's what separates the debaters who get better over time from the debaters who stay stuck at their novice level. That's really the main difference. And that might sound odd to you because debate is so much about arguing against someone, but in order to argue effectively against another person, you need to understand where they're coming from and how their arguments are put together. You have to understand the logic of your opponent's argument in order to take it apart. That's especially true when you have an impartial judge, someone who's not already on your side, hasn't already bought into your ideas. If you're trying to convince a neutral observer that you're correct, you need to show that you've actually considered your opponent's side of the argument and that you've actually thought about it and that you have responses to their strongest arguments. That's what brings us into rebuttals today. Rebuttals are incredibly important. A rebuttal is a defensive argument. It's an argument against your opponent's argument. You're trying to prove your opponent's arguments wrong. In our last video, and in the video before, we learned that in a debate case, our arguments are often called contentions. Well, in debate, your rebuttal is the speech where you take each of your opponent's contentions and you break down exactly what's wrong with each of them and explain why none of those arguments are going to be strong enough to make you lose the debate. None of them are going to stop your team from having the stronger case. That's a rebuttal. In public forum debate, the rebuttal is the second speech that your team gives, and it's given by your second speaker. You have one person, the first speaker, who gets up there and gives your constructive speech, where they read your case, they show your framework and your contentions to the judge. This is where you have your positive, offensive arguments, the arguments that give you impacts that explain why your side of the resolution should win. The rebuttal speech is the next person's turn, your partner's turn, to get up there and explain that your opponent's constructive speech has problems and that none of your opponent's impacts should be making the judge vote in their favor. For this reason, the second speaker has to really think on their feet. They can't pre-write their entire case. You should not come to a debate with an entire second speech written out. That's not going to work because you haven't heard what your opponents are going to say yet. Let's say you're the second speaker and you're getting up there to give your speech, your rebuttal speech. You have 4 minutes in a public forum debate to rebut your opponent's speech, which was also 4 minutes long. So what are you going to do for those 4 minutes? Well, first of all, you're going to start by giving a roadmap. This is what I'm going to talk about in this order. And in any case, you're going to say, okay, Judge, first I'm going to go over my opponent's first contention, second contention, and then their third contention. Or maybe you'll say, Judge, I'm going to go over my opponent's contentions in order, but first I'm going to address some of their definitions, or I'm going to address a problem with their framework. Let your judge know what to expect. Now, let's look at how we can actually attack opposing arguments in our rebuttal speeches. Okay, first, we need to remember that arguments, if they're complete, have three main parts: their claim, the warrant, and the impact. The claim is like the basis of the argument. The warrant is what holds the claim and the impact together if they get challenged. And the impact is the part that explains why this argument matters in deciding the debate. Well, a rebuttal should really have the same idea. Your rebuttal is going to have a claim, a warrant, and an impact as well. It's interesting that I see a lot of new debaters handling the claim, warrant, impact structure very well in their first speech, but really struggling to use it in their second. It's the same idea. When you're rebutting an opposing claim, first you're going to say, here's what's wrong with your contention. You're not going to say it like that. But you're going to point out an issue with that contention. And you're going to show your evidence that this issue is real, that this contention is actually wrong. Ideally, you have evidence to show that it's wrong. At the very least, you need to provide some reasoning. Also, it's very likely that your opponent had evidence supporting their contention. So you're going to need to explain why the judge should believe your evidence and not your opponent's. Next, the warrant of your claim is to explain why your issue, the issue you pointed out, actually ruins the argument, why this actually matters. So that's going to be important because then in the impact of your rebuttal, you're going to explain why this issue affects the debate. So that's the so what. Why does this issue with the claim help you win the debate? Or at least, why does it stop that argument from helping your opponent? So I know that's a lot, but we'll come back to it in a second. First, I just want to go over a couple key concepts that second speakers need to know. First speakers need to know this too because you need to help your second speaker prepare. First is rebuttal evidence. This is defensive evidence. Evidence that you might find during your research, but you didn't include it in your first speech because it really didn't go with any of your contentions. Maybe it was purely defensive evidence. It didn't say, my side is good. It just said, my side isn't bad. You keep it in your back pocket, so to speak, so that during the debate, you can pull this evidence out in your second speech or later on when you need to do a rebuttal. Here's the thing, you know what the topic is ahead of time in public forum, and you're preparing for both sides. So you probably know what the most likely arguments are for both sides. You can predict what you're going to face. So you should prepare to face those likely arguments. Some debaters will call this preparing cards. You have, well, if they make this argument, here's our rebuttal, and here's the evidence we can use. And you want to keep that handy during the round. The reason we said cards is in the old days, people would write these out on note cards. They'd write a summary of their rebuttal, just a summary, mind you, you don't have to write it out word for word, and they would write a quotation and a citation to show that they had evidence for it. So this is a quote from this source, here's the source, here's what the source said. Now, it's really important to make sure that you stay flexible because while you can predict the most likely opposing arguments, you can't predict all possible arguments, and you can't predict exactly what your opponent's going to say. That's why we don't write out the arguments word for word. You just need to have the evidence ready so you have something to work with when you think of the argument you want to make. If you look at the case writing template that I provided for our last video, which I will also provide in the form of a link in the video description, if you look at that case writing template, you'll see that I've included sections for both pro and con to have a whole page of rebuttal evidence. And I think that's very handy. It's extra work from the perspective of someone who's just trying to get into a debate. It might seem like a lot of effort, but if you want to win, that effort is going to really pay off. It's going to make the difference between going in there and not really knowing what you're doing after speech one and spending the entire debate feeling confident and prepared. Here's another key concept, because bear in mind, you don't have to always have special evidence prepared for your rebuttal. Sometimes you already use that argument in your first speech. So we have a concept in debate called cross-apply. It's a verb, and it means to take arguments or evidence from your first speech and then use it again in your second speech. This usually happens because you and your opponent have arguments that directly clash. For example, if in a topic about Korean missile defenses, if you argue that Korean missile defenses will help keep South Korea safer, and your opponent argues that Korean missile defenses will make people less safe, those are directly clashing. They are completely opposite. And it is very likely that whatever evidence you used in your first speech to support your make people safer contention, that evidence is also going to be useful in your second speech to refute your opponent's make people less safe contention. Here's an example of what your opponent could say. Your opponent could say in their second speech, look, Judge, they claim that missile defenses will keep people safe, but cross-apply our Department of Justice evidence from contention 2. Remember, these missile defense systems have a failure rate of 40 to 60%. That means that people are going to have this false sense of security where both the Korean government and the Korean people may not take the threat of North Korean missiles seriously enough. And yet, there is still this incredible 40 to 60% chance that any missile attack will get through missile defenses. As a result, people are going to be taking more risks and they will be less safe with the missile defenses, not more. That's cross-applying. So cross-applying and rebuttal evidence are important tools to make sure you actually have evidence. And meanwhile, you are going to want to explain why your opponent's evidence isn't good enough. But here's a warning. It's not enough to attack evidence. For example, if your opponent argued the sky is blue because the Onion says so, well, the Onion is a comedy news source. It's satire. Onion articles are intentionally false. They're jokes. So the Onion's not a good source. But the sky is actually blue. Just because the source of an argument is bad doesn't mean the argument itself is wrong. This is what's called the fallacy fallacy. Just because an opponent didn't do a good job of making their argument, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Not to mention that if your opponent has bad evidence, but you have no evidence, bad evidence is probably still better. So make sure that you aren't just saying they have bad evidence. You have to say they have bad evidence, plus we can prove that this isn't true. Just having bad evidence is not the same as being wrong. You need your opponents to be wrong. Let's look at how you do this. So remember, your opponent's arguments, their contentions, are built like a boat. They have a claim that keeps it afloat in the water and forms the basis of everything else. They have a warrant that protects the impact and keeps it connected and linked to the claim, and they have an impact, which is the part they're actually hoping to use to convince the judge that they are correct and the judge should vote for them. Well, you can hit any part of this argument. You can hit the claim, you can hit the warrant, or you can hit the impact. If you can knock out any one of those three parts, you're making an effective rebuttal. You could also go after all three of them, or two at a time. There's nothing wrong with that. But bear in mind that you only need to knock out one of these parts to defeat the argument. So if you've got the time, and if you can easily see multiple problems with your opponent's argument, by all means, go all in. Do what's called the kitchen sink approach and hit your opponent in every piece of their contention. As your opponents get better, however, you're going to need that time to go after their other contentions. You're not going to have time to hit every single part. So you're going to have to pick and choose the weak link in their argument and focus on that. All right, the rebuttal strategies are very simple. You can go after their claim, say, look, the claim is wrong. Their whole contention is based on a false assumption. Or, yeah, okay, the claim is true, but the link is wrong. The impact doesn't actually follow from that claim. Now, pay attention, because while attacking claims is often very helpful as a novice, once you get good, your opponents are unlikely to make a lot of bad claims. It's probably more likely that they'll make a really good claim and a really good impact, but they'll forget to make a strong link between them. At high levels of competition, attacking the warrant is one of the most important strategies for rebuttals. Finally, you can have the claim be correct and the warrant be correct, but the impact just isn't that important. This is the case of the boat that's super armored and really strong and can't be sunk, but it can only fit a teeny tiny bit of gold. Basically, yes, judge, they're correct. This is going to happen and it's going to have this effect, but who cares? That effect is tiny compared to all of the impacts that we've shown. And of course, there are some other options for rebuttal strategies. We'll talk about them later. These are the main ones. The claim is wrong, the warrant doesn't link the claim to the impact properly, or the impact isn't that important. Let me give you an example of a really, really bad contention for a really bad resolution. This will help us see how all these strategies work. If you have a piece of paper, I'd recommend that you try writing down your shots at a rebuttal for each part. All right, the resolution before us is resolved. Every child should have a pony. Yes, really. So, first of all, every child needs magic in their lives in order to grow up happy and healthy. According to Mary Wynn's 1983 article for the New York Times, children are suffering from a lack of magic due to having to grow up too quickly. We can see how magical ponies are from the TV show My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, where not only do some ponies perform magic, but the pony's very friendship is, as the title suggests, magic. Friendship with a pony can therefore bring magic back into a child's life and solve our lack of magic problem. Once every child has a pony, then we will guarantee a stable and reliable magic source for every child in the nation. The result will be a nation full of happy, healthy children. We will strike a blow against childhood unhappiness and ill health for generations to come. Yeah. So think about this. Pause the video. How would you rebut the claim of this argument? How would you rebut the warrant? And how would you rebut the impact? Once you've tried an argument for each part of the contention, unpause the video and we'll see what we can come up with. All right, let's look at the claim first. Every child needs magic in their lives in order to grow up happy and healthy. So that's a claim. That's the basis of their argument. And they have evidence, this 1983 article by Mary Wynn for the New York Times. So first of all, no, children don't need magic to grow up happy and healthy. That's not necessary. They need food and clothing and shelter and love and affection and education. They need immunizations. They need health care. But they don't need magic. How do I know that? Well, first of all, magic isn't real. And my source for that is everything. But if you really wanted to prepare for this resolution, you could actually go look up someone like the amazing Randy or Penn and Teller who make it their life's mission to prove that magic is in fact not real. Hopefully your judge doesn't need much convincing there. Second of all, plenty of children grow up happy and healthy without magic. Again, magic isn't real, so every child who did grow up happy and healthy presumably did so without magic. They don't need it. It is simply not true that this is a needed quality. Furthermore, this evidence, who is Mary Wynn? Why is the source going back to 1983? Just because children are suffering from a lack of magic back when Mary Wynn is writing in 1983 doesn't mean it's still true. And not to mention, you can actually look and find out who Mary Wynn is. It is entirely legal in a debate to ask during the question and answer period to see your opponent's sources. And if you were to ask to see this Mary Wynn article, well, here's the Mary Wynn article. It actually exists. I didn't make it up. Here's Mary Wynn. She's a journalist. She's not an expert on magic or on childhood development. She's just an op-ed columnist. And you can see from this article that she's talking about drugs. She's talking about whether children are sheltered. She's talking about whether children are being exposed too early to adult experience, whether they're being protected. So here's the thing. That's not actually literally magic. So this source is not actually talking about magic. It's just talking about whether children are growing up too fast. So it does not prove what our opponents think it proves. Okay, so there's a few different ways that we could back up our arguments. We could have already researched and prepared rebuttal evidence. We might have something in our first speech that we could cross-apply, or we could use our opponent's evidence against them by calling for it during crossfire, reading it quickly, and realizing that it doesn't say what this contention thinks it says. All of this leads up to the warrant. Very simply, if children don't need magic, then ponies aren't going to help. My opponent is saying that we need a pony for every single child in order to solve this horrible acute crisis in children lacking magic. But if children don't actually need magic, then that entire reason for getting ponies is null and void. The impact of that flaw is that the entire contention falls, since it's based on a false premise. In debate, we often use the term falls to mean that a contention falls if it doesn't work properly. It means that the judge should just not consider it when they're judging the round because it doesn't make any sense. So if the claim is wrong, then the contention is going to fall because it's based on a false premise. All right, let's look at the next step. That's one way to rebut this claim. Hopefully you came up with your own way. Maybe it was similar to mine, maybe it was different, but make sure it was this complete. So going on to the warrant. So they're using My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. So they're showing that ponies are magical, and so if you make friends with a pony, you have magic. So we just need every child to make friends with a pony, and will bring magic back into children's lives. So, okay, first of all, magic isn't real, and so ponies can't be magical, and also children don't need magic. But let's say that we either didn't want to attack the claim. We're like, okay, we'll give it to you. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that magic is real and children need it. Or we can use even if. So even if magic is real, that doesn't mean that ponies are magical. How do I know that? Well, first of all, magic isn't real. But even if magic were real, ponies are just regular animals. They're just, a breed of horse. And they live their whole lives without doing anything particularly supernatural. They eat, they sleep, they poop. They do a lot of non-magical things. I mean, I think children who think ponies are sweet and lovely and made of sunshine, who see how ponies actually behave and who have to smell them and who have to feed them and take care of them, might actually be losing magic from their lives. Also, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic is a fictional children's TV show. It's a cartoon. It's a very good cartoon. It's been praised, but it's not an accurate depiction of reality, and it's not trying to be. It's a totally worthless source. So as long as you have any evidence at all that ponies are not magical, this source should not carry any weight with the judge. I would argue that even if you don't have a source, the judge should disregard this. This is not a real show. So, what's the warrant here? Well, if ponies aren't magical, then they're not going to help with this childhood magic problem, right? And that's going to have a pretty big impact. So, even if the magic problem is real, and if you want to get good at debate, get used to saying even if. That way you're not conceding that magic is real or that children need it. But even if the judge doesn't buy that, even if the judge is convinced that magic is real and children need it, well, ponies aren't going to solve that problem because they're not magical and they are not going to bring magic into a child's life. And you could go on in this vein. You could also point out that just because you have a pony doesn't mean you're going to make friends with it. You can point out that keeping a pony captive in a New York studio apartment probably not going to be conducive to bringing out the magical qualities of this pony or to making friends with it. The pony's probably going to be pretty miserable. But in any case, hopefully you came up with some kind of convincing, complete argument against that warrant, because we're about to look at the impact. All right, this is the impact. The impact is that we're going to give every child a pony, and that means that every child's going to get magic all the time because they have a pony to provide that magic. And the result is going to be that every child is happy and healthy. And that's going to cause childhood unhappiness and ill health to be massively reduced for generations and generations. That's a huge impact. Making children happy and healthy for generations, that's huge. So how do we fight that? Well, first of all, if the claim is wrong, then the impact doesn't matter because you're not going to get to it. If the warrant is wrong, then the impact doesn't matter because the claim isn't going to lead to the impact. But we can also attack the impact directly. First of all, just because we give everyone a pony, it doesn't mean that we have a stable magic supply. And just because we have a stable magic supply, that doesn't mean that every child is going to be happy and healthy. For one thing, ponies die and they run away and they get sick. They're not going to be stable all the time. And on top of that, there's no way to guarantee that ponies will make friends with their children. Also, even if magic were real, and even if children did need it, that's not the only thing they need. They need food, clothing, shelter, space. If magic is real and the pony is providing magic, but the pony is also eating all of your food and taking up your bedroom and making your house smell bad and ruining the sanitary conditions of your living space and getting really upset and ruining the furniture because it doesn't have any space to run around and frolic, well then your pony is causing more problems than it's solving. That magic that it might provide isn't going to balance out all of the problems it's causing in your life. Children are going to be pretty unhealthy if they have to share tiny apartments in a city with a pony. And they're going to be pretty unhappy if they're trying to take care of this huge animal that needs lots of looking after and is a huge responsibility, and they find that they just can't do it. So actually, we're not striking a blow against childhood unhappiness or ill health. In fact, remember, giving everybody a pony is going to use a lot of resources, and it's going to take up a lot of everyone's time. And if we really wanted to help childhood unhappiness and health, maybe we should provide health care. Maybe we should improve economic inequality that lowers stresses on families. Maybe we should provide free childcare. Maybe we should invest in better, happier schools. Maybe we should try to address childhood violence. Maybe magical ponies aren't enough to really meet the needs of the children in this nation. So the warrant here is that if ponies are magical and magic is real and children actually need magic, but giving everyone a pony isn't a very good solution to the magic problem, then we're putting all of this effort into a solution that doesn't work. And meanwhile, that's taking time and effort and attention away from solutions that could actually solve the problems. And the impact here is that we're not actually helping children to be happier or healthier. We might even be hurting their happiness and healthiness. So really, even if you agree that ponies are magical, and even if you agree that ponies can provide magic, and even if you agree that magic is real, and even if you agree that children need magic to be happy and healthy, that still does not mean that it is worthwhile to give every child a pony. Over the course of this video, we've looked at what a rebuttal is in debate and how it's related to the qualities of being a good listener. We've looked at how you can construct a strong rebuttal speech, starting with a roadmap, and then attacking each of your opponent's contentions. We've also looked at how you can construct a full rebuttal using the same claim, warrant, impact structure as we did when writing our first speech's contentions, our constructive contentions. We've also looked at how you can zero in on claims, warrants, and impacts in order to attack the weak points in your opponent's arguments. I do want to point something out now, is that there's no rule that says your opponent has to use claim, warrant, impact structure in their contentions, whether in public forum debate or in any other type of debate. In fact, if you are a novice debater who is going up against other novice debaters, it is very likely that your opponents will not use claim, warrant, impact structure. Or they will try, but they won't do it very well. Or they might think they did it, but they didn't make it clear which is which. In that case, your job is to listen carefully and figure out what's missing. So you can still attack your opponent's arguments by pointing out, hey, not there's no warrant here, because remember, there's no rule that says they need a warrant. There's no rule that says you need a claim or an impact. But you can point out, Judge, they've told you that ponies are magical, and they've pointed out that children need magic, but they haven't told you why. They haven't told you why that matters. They haven't said anything about what we're going to gain from giving every child a pony. Meanwhile, we've told you a lot about everything we stand to lose from this harebrained scheme. Therefore, you should prefer the very clear impacts from our case to the unclear and potentially non-existent benefits of giving everyone a magical pony. That's an example of what you can do if your opponent simply leaves the impact out. If your opponent leaves out the warrant, you can point out, Judge, our opponents have told us that magic is important to every child. And they told us that children will be happier and healthier when they all have ponies. But they haven't explained how that works. I assume they think that ponies are magical, but they've given you no evidence that that's the case. In fact, ponies are regular animals, and they do plenty of non-magical things. So until they can explain how exactly ponies are providing all this magic, you need to ignore all of this happiness and healthiness because they haven't shown you how we're ever going to accomplish it. That would be an example of an argument if your opponents forgot to buff up their warrant. So if your opponent's not using claim, warrant, impact, structure, don't think to yourself, oh no, now I don't know how to attack it. No, that's great because you can figure out whatever they're missing from their speech and attack that missing piece. Again, remember, you don't win because your opponent forgot a warrant. You win because when your opponent forgot their warrant, you now have an opportunity to come in and show how their claim and their impact are not connected, right? Your judge doesn't care about impact, warrant, claim. Your judge cares about, are children going to be happier and healthier or not? Or in other cases, are we going to save lives or not? Are we going to improve the economy or not? They want to hear the impacts on the real world. So just remember, at the end of every rebuttal that you give, you need to make it clear to your judge, not just did their contention fall, did we disprove their impact, but how in the real world has your rebuttal arguments changed what your judge should think of all of their case? What number of lives or number of happy, healthy children or number of unemployed people getting jobs or acres of rainforest being saved are going to be accomplished or not accomplished based on the rebuttals that you have given? Your opponents claimed this impact. You've said, no, actually, we're going to get this impact. How does that change the scoring of the debate? I hope that was interesting and helpful for you. I encourage you to take a second look at some of the sample cases that I've linked to in this video and the last, and take a stab at how you would try and rebut their contentions. As always, I'm Mr. Esty. Happy debating.